Yeah, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NFL Strategy Show presented by Jock Market. And we got a good one today, 54.5-point total. Rams traveling to Seattle to take on the Seahawks. Should be a close game, less than a field goal spread. And I'm here to break it all down. Dave Lochran on Twitter at Laffy_D, joined by Matt Gajeski. Follow the man at Matt_Gajeski and say hello to him while you're there. Matt, this should be a good game for all intents and purposes. We still have some question marks regarding Chris Carson's status and a few other things that we'll get to along the way. But all in all, NFC West divisional matchups usually don't let us down.
Oh, of course not. Thursday night football, it's much better than last Thursday's single game showdown. We have a ton of viable options and some really interesting strategies and approaches I think we can take to the single game tonight.
I'm looking forward to it. Now, when I look at both of these teams, I see some interesting things. First off, I thought the LA Rams coming into last week were obviously not unbeatable. There's an insane level of parity in football. I expect them to be able to lose to, any average to above average team because that's just the way the league works. I didn't anticipate them getting blown out at home. And the Arizona Cardinals are no doubt a good football team. They came into that undefeated. They're now the lone undefeated team of 32 in the NFL. But that did definitely make me look at this team a little bit differently, just in the sense that, all right, you guys look unbeatable. You beat Tampa Bay handily. You beat Indy. You beat up on the Chicago Bears. And then the Arizona Cardinals come into your stadium and absolutely trash you to the tune of 37-20. And honestly, the game wasn't even that close.
Yeah, I think we're still learning about these teams to some degree. Level of competition is always going to be something we have to factor in. And the Rams obviously had a big game that you mentioned in there, but I think Indianapolis and Chicago, those aren't two marquee wins by any means. And that NFC West division, just like how stacked is that? These divisional games are going to be so important for who actually gets out of that division. Cardinals, I'm very impressed with their defense. Coming into the year, I honestly thought that they had one of the worst secondaries in football, and they've put it together with a lot of those young players, the Byron Murphys, the Budda Bakers of the world. They've really put it together.
So that's kind of the thing, right? I mean, is that our Arizona secondary? Are they for real?
It's still a 4-game sample, but I mean, they've now defended some really good opponents and going out and stopping Matthew Stafford, the Rams with all those high-powered options. That's notable. I mean, they had a 1-point win over Minnesota, really, really close game. But I mean, Minnesota has a strong passing attack too. They had to stop Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen. And then they did stop a healthy Titans in week 1 when A.J. Brown and Julio Jones were both out there. So I think those are 3 very good wins for them. In their pass defense, they faced 3 really good opponents. They mixed in the Jaguars, and they're not going to take too much away from that. But so far, I think Arizona has lived up to expectations and exceeded them.
Yeah, and I know this game has nothing to do with the Arizona Cardinals, but it does help us to, get a look at everything on both sides. And another thing too is their pass rush has just been very good too, and that's going to generate a lot of trouble for opposing passers when they don't have time to throw. But on the other side too, Matt, you've got the Seattle Seahawks. We're going to break each of these down one by one, who started off the season with with a win against Indy and then dropped 2 straight to Tennessee and Minnesota, and then got that win, surprising to many, against San Francisco. What do we do going into this game looking at the Seattle Seahawks? Are they just one of those teams, as they always are every single season, where they may not win every game, but they're pretty much going to compete every single Sunday, or in this case, Thursday?
I think so. They always seem to have some clear deficiency. For years, it was the offensive line. In recent years, last year and so far to start this year, it's very much been their defense. And I think a lot of people had high expectations for the new offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, a high pass rate, a more up-tempo scheme. They haven't really shown that outside of situations where they've played from behind and needed to increase their tempo and pass a lot more. So that's a little bit concerning. But when you're facing the Rams, those are the kind of game scripts you can expect. This LA Rams team, we are expecting them to score. That should push Seattle into more of the game scripts where they're throwing as well. I do think this team is a contender. It's kind of unfortunate that we have 4 teams in the NFC West that are all very good, and 1, if not 2 of them don't make the playoffs.
It's the best division in football. I mean, I guess you could make an argument that the AFC West is also up there, but the NFC West, man, this is a gauntlet if you're trying to get through it. Is one of these teams having to face divisional opponents 6 times? It's not fun. Mark D says, does Laffy remind anyone else of a young Rex Ryan? That's flattering. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. But in all seriousness, if you guys haven't done so yet, hit that thumbs up. Appreciate you hanging out with us every single day of the week here. And of course, Mondays and Thursdays as we break down everything for the Showdown slates. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Almost at 61,000. So we're creeping up quickly. Thanks to all of you guys supporting us as we've been doing this a long time now. Well, relatively speaking, long enough. But Matt and I have been doing this show. This is what, our second year doing every Showdown slate together. I think it's year 2, right?
Yes, sir. And I don't know what's funny, the Rex Ryan comparison for you, or the Suggs comparison for AB. Is that who it was?
Oh, that was that. He took exception to that comparison.
I don't know which one. I don't know which one's worse.
Yeah. I mean, because with me, I'm just so used to hearing shit that I don't think about it. AB was pretty new on shows at that point, and he's like, now I got people comparing me to Terrell Suggs. But the thing was, if you remember, he said that basically the league, the players had voted Terrell Suggs ugliest player in the league. So, I mean, that wasn't kind. That was not nice.
It's too funny. The chat is so funny.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely liven things up. There's no doubt. That's why I suggest all of you subscribe so we can do this all the time, and hit that thumbs up. Oh, and if you want to join, hit that join button down below. Get the custom emojis, the badges, and some other cool stuff along the way. Matt, the LA Rams diving into this one, coming off again a brutal beatdown at the hands of the Arizona Cardinals. But we have to start with Cooper Kupp here, and then we'll work our way to the quarterback position with Stafford. The guy's seen double-digit targets in every game. As a matter of fact, here are his target totals since week 1: 10, 11, 12, 13. So count on 14 today. He has almost a 35% target share, an insane amount of red zone opportunities already, and we're only 4 weeks in. He let a lot of people down last week, but the targets and opportunity were still there for Cooper Kupp. I mean, you have to come into this one, and I know he's expensive, but at least anticipating that Cooper Kupp once again is going to be the most heavily targeted wide receiver. And I've said, like, I think there's going to be games where it's going to be Robert Woods and where Cooper Kupp, doesn't see such an insane amount of opportunity. But up until this point, that hasn't been the case. Matthew Stafford is clearly leaning on him regardless of circumstances.
You're absolutely right. I had the same thought you did to start the year, that these guys would trade big games back and forth. And I think they will to some degree. And I think where I was wrong is that it's just going to be Cooper Kupp a lot more frequently than it is Robert Woods. Robert Woods has had a solid target share himself, but the efficiency hasn't been there. And it still doesn't even compare to Cooper Kupp. You just look at these two teams on the year, or these two players on the year. You now have Cooper Kupp at it. You already said it, a ridiculous 34% target share. Woods down at 18.5%. Air yards also reflect Cooper Kupp there. Based on what we've seen so far through 4 games, I'm not sure the pricing reflects the true difference we've seen between these guys. It's a $4,000 difference on DraftKings. I don't have the FanDuel or on FanDuel, excuse me. On DraftKings, it's similar. I think you can clearly get to Kupp in the captain spot, but I think Robert Woods is still going to be a nice contrarian option for that reason. But ultimately, it's really hard to get away from Cooper Kupp. We talk about narrow target distributions, and usually it's between 2 receivers. Cooper Kupp, he's basically seeing like the Devontae Adams workload from last year. So just a really, really hard guy to fade.
Yeah, and good point too from Andrew. Says it's crazy Cooper Kupp is more expensive than both quarterbacks on DraftKings, Matt.
Yeah, that is ridiculous. Have we seen this recently? I cannot remember a slate where we had this.
Well, we have, because for sure. But it was
with bad teams though. Like you see this,
right? Exactly. That's the weird. Yeah, like Christian McCaffrey, right? That would be one of them.
Or like if the Texans were on the main slate, Brandon Cooks would be more expensive than Davis Mills.
Right. Exactly. But in this case, I mean, it really is crazy to see Cooper Kupp's price point. How much do you like him right now in the captain spot at this salary?
I think we need to monitor ownership throughout the day because I'm really curious where it shakes out. Right now, Cooper Kupp is slightly behind Matthew Stafford and Russell Wilson. And you and I have talked a lot about how wide receivers have a clear path to outscoring quarterbacks on these single game slates, particularly on DraftKings. And I think you can take this a step further with Cooper Kupp and just look at his absurd target share and air yard share. And he clearly has the best chance of doing this out of any pass catcher on the slate just because of how much he's used. If Matthew Stafford continues to funnel opportunities to Cooper Kupp, I think the pricing's pretty accurate and he deserves to be more expensive than the quarterbacks on DraftKings specifically because he has that clear path to outscoring them via PPR volume, potential touchdowns, all of that.
Yeah. And, we have that top showdown and single game plays tool or top showdown plays tool for DraftKings and for FanDuel. And when you look at it, it has the probability that one of these guys is going to be the top overall scorer on the slate, which is extremely important for Showdown. And Matthew Stafford's actually 2% higher than Cooper Kupp, despite being less expensive. Cooper Kupp has, as a matter of fact, Cooper Kupp has the lowest leverage score by a lot on this slate. Matt, it doesn't mean you don't play him. It doesn't mean he's not good. But it does suggest that maybe we've jumped the shark when it comes to Cooper Kupp's price tag, at least putting him that far ahead of someone like Stafford.
I'm surprised he's the lowest leverage player because he's still less owned than Stafford. It's not drastic. And I mean, it makes sense that Stafford has a higher leverage score. He's projected raw higher points. His ownership is slightly higher, but I think you come to expect that from quarterbacks. If you're running simulations, things like that, which a lot of our tools are based on, you're going to see the quarterback outscore receivers most of the time. It's on DraftKings specifically, it's just the receivers have a path if target volume's funneled to them to outscore the quarterbacks a little more easily than they do on FanDuel. But those are really interesting points, and it's a very unique situation with Cooper Kupp seeing the volume he is, being as popular as he's going to be, and where his price is. You're going to have to make tough decisions if you roster Cooper Kupp. Like if you do, you probably don't get both quarterbacks unless you just take a nasty punt. So it's a tough situation. And I think it's actually going to be an interesting puzzle tonight because of that.
I do too. And, another thing is when you talk about just touchdown regression, 5 touchdowns through your first 2 weeks, double-digit scores in back-to-back weeks and 2 and 3, that's not going to happen every week. But he is going to be a PPR monster. And what's insane to me, Matt, he has almost a 40% target share in the red zone, which is just, it's crazy, man. Basically, when it comes to red zone targets, it's him at 39%, Robert Woods at 26%, Tyler Higbee at 22%, which if you want is probably a pretty good segue to the latter two guys, because while Robert Woods hasn't necessarily been dominant by any stretch in terms of target share overall, or just being able to rack up the yardage and receptions that we've seen in the past, he is still somebody that's getting a good amount of looks inside the 20, which when you're talking about a showdown slate is a lot more valuable than if we're saying, 12, 13 game slate, he gets a lot of red zone targets, but he's already seen 6 red zone targets and 3 inside the 10-yard line.
Can you repeat those red zone targets again? If you have them in front of you for all of the Rams players?
Sure. Are you seeing something different?
No, I didn't have it in front of me. So that was something that I hadn't seen. Sure.
Okay. So, Matthew Stafford's attempted 23 red zone passes already, which for those of you out there wondering, that's a lot through 4 games. 9 have gone to Kupp. That's 9 have gone to Kupp. 6 have gone to Woods. 5 have gone to Higbee. And then the remaining 3 have gone 1 Jefferson, 2 Darrell Henderson.
Okay. That's a little surprising to me that Woods has been so involved in the red zone comparatively to his overall target volume. I mean, this Rams team is going to score a lot, and we expected them to score a lot. We're going to expect them to continue doing so. The total in tonight's game reflects a high scoring environment as well. But that's a pretty high target share for Woods near the red zone. I think their target shares will merge to some degree overall over the course of the year. I don't think, a 34% target share is sustainable for Kupp. I do think he's clearly going to be ahead of Woods. But if you're just talking raw value and just the plays on this slate, Woods needs to be considered just for the fact that he's significantly cheaper than Kupp. Like you can get Woods in a price range that's really not even close at this point. 7,600 for him on DraftKings for comparable target volume. I think that is worthwhile.
Can you hold your coffee mug up? All right. And then just like come up a little bit so the top of your shirt's in the screen.
I know what you're doing here.
Jordan had a great comment. He said, Matt Kajeski doing the show live from the Notre Dame gift shop.
There's been a couple really good comments this morning.
That was so solid. You're straight Notre Dame out. I love it. From the Notre Dame gift shop. Jordan, did you say that when the coffee mug got broken out? Yeah. That's so good. What about Higbee though, Matt? I mean, he's not like shocking the world or anything, but he's still from the standpoint of a tight end. Let me kind of phrase it this way and get your opinion. From a tight end perspective, Tyler Higbee still has seen, 5+ targets in 3 of 4 games on a team that is very much going to get a lot of opportunities in the red zone, which I think is viable for us. Like we said, he does have still, what did I say? 5 red zone targets in 4 games. Yeah. I'm okay with that. I do think there are some positives when it comes to Tyler Higbee. He's also seen 2 targets, 20+ yards downfield. And I don't think Matt Stafford's afraid to stretch the field with him. So there are some things I like. There's obviously some things I don't like. One being Cooper Kupp is just the guy that's getting almost an absurd amount of the work. But at Higbee's price point, how does he factor into everything for you tonight?
I think Higbee's a solid play, and I think he's a guy that people won't want to click on. And I mean, that target volume is depressed, I think, because of that 1 target game he saw in week 2. Outside of that, he's actually seen pretty good target volume on the year, which is not something we can say about most tight ends. Higbee is really interesting for that reason. Like you mentioned, his involvement is fantastic in the pass game overall, in the red zone. It's beat downfield as well. The targets you mentioned beyond 20 yards, those are really positive for his usage. And like you said, we're expecting touchdown regression from a guy like Kupp. Those will go somewhere else. And we've seen Higbee be a big part of the offense. At his price point, he's very viable in that mid-price range. If you're deciding between like him and kickers in the high, or defenses for that matter, in the high-scoring game environment we're projecting to see tonight, more than comfortable with Higbee as an every down player, something we've never really seen from his career until Everett left. So all that's positive.
Yeah, and he's catching over 83% of the passes thrown his way. As you meant, the only thing I did want to ask you about too is he played 100% of snaps in weeks 1 and 2, and then 75 and 79% in weeks 3 and 4. Johnny Munn started getting, a decent amount of opportunities. Is that just noise, or does that concern you that he wasn't on the field nearly as much in back-to-back games?
I think Munt has a purpose, and it's just blocking. Like Munt has 1 target on the year. He's been a blocker throughout his career. I do think it matters. You obviously want your players on the field, but in the clear passing situations, it looks like Higbee's been out there, and the routes reflect this too. So sometimes you see this with tight ends where you have a guy that's a pure pass catcher. Like Eric Ebron's been a great example of this throughout his career, where he's never going to be 100% like snap share player, but when he's on the field, it's those clear passing situations. So I do think Higbee functions in that role.
Okay. Yeah. He ran 50 combined routes in weeks 1 and 2. I don't have routes per drop back, and then 60 in week 3 and 4. My assumption would be playing from behind in week 32 in week 4, but still, I think you're right. It's not really something to be concerned about. All right. Now, Matt, this is where it gets interesting. And hey, hit that thumbs up. We're almost at 50 likes here. It's pretty early in the morning, especially for you guys in the West Coast or in mountain time. I know Jordan is literally sitting in pitch dark right now. I'm not making that up. You can see his face. And then it looks like, you guys remember, Are You Afraid of the Dark? After they would throw the water on the fire afterwards at the end. That's what it looks like. Jordan, it looks like he has a flashlight held under his. Matt, am I wrong?
No, Jordan's doing the stream, I think, by candlelight.
Yes, it's remarkable. Why? Because he has a buddy sleeping on the couch and he doesn't want to wake him up. So he's a good friend, but still, it's creepy looking. Jordan or Matt, it gets dicey when you start talking Van Jefferson and Deshaun Jackson, because both of these guys are 100% capable of breaking slates. We already saw Van Jefferson do it on the first primetime, or the first Thursday night football game, I think it was, of the year. Wasn't that against it was a Thursday night game. I don't know. It was a primetime game between the Bears and the Rams, and Jefferson had that catch and run, where the Bears just forgot to touch him after he went down. He got up and just walked into the end zone.
Yeah, I mean, I think these guys will be volatile as the third pass catcher for the LA Rams. But at the same time, Jefferson's just playing significantly more than Deshaun Jackson. And Jackson's always going to be interesting because his skill set, when he has big games, they're going to be big because of the downfield ability, the long touchdowns he scores. But it's just really hard between the two to bet against Van Jefferson because of the snaps. Like overall snap share in the year, 76% for Van Jefferson, Deshaun Jackson down at 25%. And I don't think the price really reflects that because Deshaun Jackson has had big games. Usually these quarter of the snap type players are very, very cheap. And Deshaun Jackson, he's cheaper comparatively, but still not really like cheap near that punt floor that we try to target when we're looking at normal wide receiver fours. So overall, I think just getting to Van Jefferson is going to be the sharper play in that price salary range.
Do you see any merit? And I have a pretty good lean of where your answer is going to be here. Do you see any merit to playing both of them in the same lineup? Or if you're playing Stafford, are you going to want at least one of the big two in terms of, I don't even know if you consider Robert Woods as one of the big two anymore, though.
Yeah, his target share kind of reflects that he's closer to Kupp, but the production hasn't been there. I think just looking back at the long history we have of Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp together, we can still fall back on our priors and assume he's a little closer to Kupp than Van Jefferson. But like you said, it's a lot closer than I think we would like it to be at this point. To your question about can we play Van Jefferson and Deshaun Jackson together, I think you absolutely can in tournaments. We just saw a winning lineup. It was Monday night, correct? With Parham and Jared Cook. And I mean, one is
right. Oh, right.
Yeah, that one or chopped a millie. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think you're right. Yeah. Well, Neil Orfield chopped it 4 ways, I believe. Yeah, our boy Neil.
I looked at it and I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure I saw it on Twitter. I'm pretty sure Neil played both tight ends on the Chargers.
I'll tell you right now.
Yeah.
I'll tell you right now. I got it in the Hall of Fame slides right here. Neil had Cook and Donald Parham. You're right. Yes, he did.
So I think that's just one example of how a construction like this could work. It's a little different. Those were both tight ends. I think that's actually a little more difficult in this situation where you could potentially have, I would expect more plays with Jackson and Jefferson on the field together than Parham and Cook. But anyway, lineups like that can get there is the point.
They can. And again, our showdown, our top showdown plays tool, which takes all these probabilities into account, has Jefferson with a 23% chance of being in the 2 through 6 spot. Of course, DraftKings, all of those utility spots, and Deshaun Jackson at 6%. So, I mean, Matt, it's not like there's a high likelihood, but also the fact of let's consider this. CJ Awesemo was in the captain spot and won, actually another Awesemo subscriber, $560,000 was that Thursday or Monday? I don't know.
Yeah,
Thursday. Yeah. And then this past Monday, Neil Orfield, Awesemo subscriber, but now Awesemo contributor because he's great, won it with Parham and Jared Cook. So those are just back-to-back weeks of low probability things happening and being the reason people win hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was still a chop there, but it was a small one. And
yeah,
one of the biggest, perhaps the biggest strategy factor with these showdown slates in large field tournaments is trying to reduce those chops. So when you actually win, you're paid off. And Neil certainly was with that construction. Not a lot of people had the double tight end on the Chargers side. And there's a comment from the chat that Parham was 1.2. There's a big difference that plays a part of it for sure. But Jared Cook was more expensive than either of these receivers as well. So cumulatively between the two players we're talking about, the price really isn't that different. And either way, that is a factor, but it's not a huge one when you're talking more so about duplication than price. Like you probably are leaving salary on the table anyway. When you're playing large field tournaments, the salary isn't as big of a deal when you're looking for unduplicated lineups.
For sure. And hey, when we talk about these being chopped, you've got $1 million up top now. I mean, a lot of these last year were like 300,000, 250,000. You have $1 million up top, Matt. If you're chopping 2 ways or 4 ways, that's still insane. Like you know, with 200,000 entries into the DraftKings Millionaire Maker tonight, it's unlikely that you're going to solo it. Is it possible? Sure, it's possible. But if you're chopping 2 or 4 ways with those type of lineups, I mean, you're in really, really good shape. So, yeah, what I'm saying is I'd be okay chopping the Millie 3 ways tonight.
Oh yeah, you want to. If you're playing these contests, you want as few chops as possible. You're probably going to run into some unless you have just a really weird game environment. What you don't want to happen, and this is over the long term, if you play like one lineup every single week and you chop the Millie for like 6K, I know that happened earlier this year. Fantastic. You're going to be profitable in the year. But if you're playing multiple lineups and you chop a Millie for 6K and you're playing those lineups, which are negative EV overall, you're likely going to be down money on the year. And that's what we're talking about when we're thinking about duplication. You don't want to play your cash lineup in the Millie Maker and chop the thing 100 ways.
Yeah, I think Neil said he was like one interception or, fumble recovery away from losing money on the day. Think about that.
Yeah, it's crazy. And they're so top heavy too is the thing. So if you take second and there is a 26-way chop at the Millie and you run multiple lineups, you still probably are not profitable on the day.
Yep. Or if you're in first with a 2-way chop, but there's 40 lineups behind you in second place with the same lineup and they pass you, same thing applies. So yeah, there's so many ways it can go wrong, but it's also an insane amount of fun, which is why we like to talk about it and play these showdown slates and get creative. There's been a lot of times where you and I will build a lineup, which we'll do at the end of the show, and people go, "Oh, dude, that's a heinous lineup." I promise you, a lot of these lineups that win are the furthest thing from pretty. So if we do it, well, let's build a large field lineup, a large field tournament lineup at the end of the show and see what we come up with, Matt. But first, Matthew Stafford. Obvious answer. Yeah, you want to get a lot of Matthew Stafford in there, but what type of builds are you looking at with Stafford today would probably be a more appropriate question or more helpful at least.
Yeah, I think you're stacking him for sure. If you're playing him in the captain slot, I think you want 2 at least of his pass catchers, probably 3 with one of those cheaper options. And you're hoping he spreads it around, or maybe he like punches in a QB sneak, something like that. Those are the stories you're telling yourself. If you're running a receiver in the captain spot, you probably want Stafford in there either way. There's not really many situations unless the game goes way under the total. Like unless that happens, there's not a lot of situations where you get like a Cooper Kupp or a Woods in the captain spot without Stafford. Really unlikely. So in that situation, I think I'm okay with maybe like 4 Seattle players, Robert Woods in the captain and Stafford as a flex option. But honestly, with the high scoring game environment, there's a lot of ways you can play this. But if Stafford's there, I think you want at least 2 pass catchers, if not 3.
I'm just bracing myself for Johnny Munn to be in the captain spot today. It won't happen, but it won't happen. But it's just, God, some wild things happen on these slates. Anybody else you want to talk about here? Of course, you can hit on Darrell Henderson as well, and anyone else, whether it be it kicker or defense, before we move over to the Seattle side.
Yeah, I think Henderson's really the last guy to talk about, at least of consequence. Nobody else is really playing any snaps as far as pass catchers for the Rams. And it's really interesting with Darrell Henderson. He immediately comes back and plays a vast majority of the snaps. And part of that was because Sony Michel, I mean, he played a couple snaps, but I believe he fumbled. So then they put him on the bench. But Darrell Henderson is just another key piece of this offense that's going to be in scoring position a lot. And again, a lot of these scores have come through Cooper Kupp to begin the year. But even if they increase their red zone run rate slightly, Darrell Henderson could be the beneficiary. And you look at things like workload, it's been there for Darrell Henderson. So he's somebody we need to look at as well. I think he'll be a more contrarian captain if you're looking at players on the Ram side. Right now, he's below 10% in ownership. He's the 6th most owned captain. He's actually below 50% ownership overall. So I like the potential leverage you're getting with him, not just from his lower ownership, but you're directly leveraging the pass game for Seattle or for LA if you're just talking about captains like Matthew Stafford, Kupp, and Robert Woods.
I always try and ask this question, Matt. If you're captaining Darrell Henderson, what does that do to change the overall build of your lineup, given that there's no real correlation between his pass catchers and quarterback?
I think there's a couple ways you can approach it. There's situations where the pass game still has success, but Darrell Henderson punches in the touchdowns. There's also game scripts, perhaps, where this is a really low scoring environment where the receivers just don't get there compared to the Seattle side where Henderson just outscores them based on volume. So I'm okay playing him with a variety of constructions.
All right. Seattle Seahawks. Let's talk about him. Russell Wilson. This guy was like leading the MVP race through the first half of last season. Fell off quite a bit. Their defense got better. They became more conventional or traditional on offense, and things took a turn for the better for the Seahawks, for the worst when it comes to Russell Wilson. But this year, Matt, you're not seeing a lot of passing volume. That is for sure. He's not running a ton. I mean, sure, last game he had a little bit. He did run in a touchdown, but the truth is, like, he's just seen, and we saw a lot of this last year, a couple games that were really hyper efficient that have bolstered his fantasy totals. But he has been a relatively low volume passer, averaging well under 30 attempts this season. He's not running a ton, at least not for many yards. But here we are, Russell Wilson against a good Rams secondary, but in a game where they're only 2.5-point dogs with a 54.5-point total, and they have a 26-point implied total at home themselves.
For sure. And I think you have to consider him from the raw scoring environment of the game. Most people widely consider bookmakers, Vegas, the lines they project and the totals they project to be the most efficient metric we have for predicting these games as far as game script, overall scoring environment, which would indicate that Seattle is going to put up some points here. We know the Rams have shown the ability to put up points, and there's a chance Seattle simply is playing from behind because their defense hasn't lived up to expectations this year. If that's the case, you should see Russell Wilson pushing to 30 attempts rather than the low 20s we've seen in some games. And it's very much been a dichotomy. The games they've lost, he's gone over 30 attempts. The games they've won, he actually had 23 pass attempts in both of those games. So the Seahawks have been game script dependent, and they've been game script sensitive this year. In competitive games or games they're playing from behind, they will lean on Russell Wilson to throw the ball a little more. Those are the situations, and I think tonight projects to be one of them just based on what we see from Vegas, where you can target Russell Wilson with a little more confidence.
Who do you like more, Lockett or Metcalf?
It's really hard to know how healthy Lockett is. Like, I think he's playing through an injury again.
Really?
He got hurt in week 3.
I know he was questionable too, but don't you think some of that is just your typical, it was the hip injury, I think, Matt, right?
Yeah. The thing is, I just don't know how to evaluate that.
Fair, especially for a speed guy like Lockett that relies on a lot of deep targets. But I think it's also just kind of reasonable to assume that Tyler Lockett's going to have big weeks and he's going to have bad weeks. That's what we get from Tyler Lockett. I mean, last year, 38% of his yards, 37% of his receptions, and 80% of his touchdowns came across 3 games. So he had those other 13 games, 7 of them were outside of the top 50 at his position. 11 of them were outside of the top 20. The guy will have huge games. He will blow slates up. And when he does that, you're really wishing. You remember last year, I know you remember this, against Arizona on a showdown slate. He had 3 touchdowns and like 200 yards. If you didn't have Tyler Lockett, just close your computer, turn your TV off, and go to bed.
For sure. And he's always going to have that big playability. As far as deciphering between the two, it's difficult on a week-to-week basis. The target distribution is very narrow between the two, so we know we want at least one of them. Picking between them is essentially flipping a coin. If I have to do so, which a lot of you guys are going to have to make these decisions, it's very hard to get constructions where you have Lockett, Metcalf, and then you probably don't even have enough money left for Russell Wilson unless you're punting everything. But when you're deciding between the two, I think you have to at least look at some of these things. Lockett played for a large stretch of last year injured and still suited up in games. And even the last 2 games, and it's really hard. Like, I don't even know if this matters because it's a 2-game sample, but DK Metcalf has now out-targeted him 17-9 in the last 2 games, which is after he suffered the injury and was on the injury report. Does that mean something? No idea, but it's at least worth mentioning if I'm splitting hairs and trying to decide between the two, which you have to do based on price.
For what it's worth, I'm with you. I'm just saying it's tough for me to try and decipher whether or not Lockett's playing injured or Lockett's just being Tyler Lockett, you know?
For sure. If you're playing multiple lineups, the easy answer is play them both. If you're playing one, I think it might be worth looking at Metcalf.
And also, it's worth pointing out that while Lockett had 2 huge games to start the season, one of them with 11 targets. The other one was only 5 targets. He just went 4 for 102 touchdowns against Indy on 2 of the craziest touchdown receptions you're going to see. The guy's supremely talented, but the floor there is very low. How do you see the defenses playing Lockett and Metcalf? Do you see any situation where you'd rather have one guy based on coverage here?
Yeah, I kind of embarrassed. I know this has kind of been my shtick to ignore these cornerback wide receiver matchups. But I saw on Twitter, did not verify myself, but it was from a reputable source, so we are going to consider it true, that Jalen Ramsey hasn't been shadowing this year. So he's moved in and out of the slot a little bit. They've used him in unique ways, but that kind of already brings me to play whichever guy fits in your lineup, whichever one you have a strong inclination, especially if a guy like Ramsey's not shadowing. You can't even really split the hair and saying, okay, Ramsey's shadowing this guy, we can't play him, or at least it gives you a little bit of a lean towards the other. That hasn't even been happening with LA.
Yeah, and if that's the case, well, there's no real decision to be made based on that. So, all right, fair enough. How about the tight end position? Gerald Everett has been in COVID-19 protocol. He's still questionable. So I don't necessarily know if we're going to get confirmation sooner than later. But do you have him in or out today?
From my understanding, he has to pass his test today. If he does, he can play. If he doesn't, he's out.
Right.
So I have no idea. Like, I think it's like concussion protocol, at least similar, where like you pass, you can play, you don't, you can't. Like, it's a black and white thing.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt about it. I wasn't sure if he was sick still or if he was sick at all, but
I don't want to bring up COVID really in this, but I know he's vaccinated. And I don't know if he's had symptoms or whatnot, but I believe he's had it, or he has it currently, or he had it last week, whatever it was. He tested positive for the virus. He was previously vaccinated. And now I think he's just waiting on, I'm pretty sure he had a negative test yesterday, and you need consecutive negative tests to play. So yeah, I would be optimistic he's out there, but nothing guaranteed.
It was just weird. I saw an injury report where usually it says COVID-19. With him, it said illness. So, I wasn't sure, but you're probably right. And at this point, it's been like, what, 11 days or so, or more than that.
Yeah. And the NFL's protocols are a little different. It's not just like the raw 10 days that I know like college has done, where it's less based on testing, but more based on time. In the NFL, you do need back-to-back negative tests. So that will be the decision factor today.
If he's active, do you have any interest in Everett? If he's not, are you looking at Will Dissly? And where do you go with Freddie Swain?
I think if he's active, he does play. I would anticipate he's going to be in like a timeshare more with Dissly than we'd seen earlier in the year, because the guy hasn't practiced. I mean, he didn't practice yesterday. He tested positive for the virus. So we're guessing he's been in isolation for, I don't know, the better part of the last 10 days. I mean, you can work out by yourself, but it's not the same as like being in practice. You're doing all your game plans via Zoom. I would anticipate Dissly playing a role there. As far as the ancillary pass catchers, if you're including Swaim in the discussion, I think he's the best option here. And he's still somebody that's really only seeing a part-time role in the offense. In week 4, he played on 45% of the snaps. He's splitting time. Sometimes they'll use 2 tight ends. Sometimes they'll mix in other receivers. It's a little difficult to decipher Seattle as far as the ancillary pass catchers. That's great for GPPs, but as far as like low risk contests, cash contests, I would prefer just hitting the ancillary guys on the Rams side.
Couple super chats to hit on. Doan's 89 says, Homer, Van Jefferson, or D-Jax in captain spot to jam in 2 quarterbacks and studs. And Matt, I'd say Van Jefferson or D-Jax, sure, but I'm not touching Travis Homer in the captain spot.
I agree with you.
And thank you to our boy Manny C. Says, good morning from the West Coast. Thanks for all your efforts, gentlemen. Thanks, Manny. Thanks for getting up early with us and Jordan Klein. And Jeff Rock, thanks for the super chat. All right, Matt, who else do we want to hit on for Seattle, if anybody?
The last thing I want to say about Freddie Swaim, I think he is the most upside of the 3 right now. He has shown the ability to play a full complement of snaps. In week 3, for example, he played on 85%. Everett has shown this as well, but I think he's less likely to do so based on, having the virus last week and not being involved in the game planning. As far as the ancillary pass catchers, I don't really think there's anybody else to mention. Disley should be out there for a decent number of snaps, but they don't use a lot besides that.
Chris Carson, questionable. This is big stuff right here, because if he doesn't play, then we're going to be looking at a running back position that is slightly muddied. You've got Travis Homer, you have DJ Dallas, but then you have Alex Collins. So obviously Alex Collins is the one where, last game, 10 for 44 and a score, even caught 2 passes for 34 yards through the air. That's all great. I don't know when we're going to have that. And obviously Rashad Penny's on the IR because he's always on the IR, in case anybody was wondering. Like, if Collins ends up being out, how heavy are you going to Collins, and what should we anticipate his ownership looking like? Because he is going to be cheap and very likely the lead back.
Yeah, right now I would say it looks like it's doubtful Chris Carson plays. The reports out there, they extend from just pure game time decision to more on the doubtful side. So I'm not sure we see him. If we do, at what capacity does he play? He's basically been in a timeshare last couple of weeks. And last week, it was nearly a 50-50 timeshare with him and Alex Collins. Now, they played that game from positive game script, and I do think that will be a factor in this game. When they're playing from ahead, it's going to be a larger workload for Collins. If they play from behind, Travis Homer is going to have a significant role in the offense. We look back to week 3, a game they lost. Homer was out there for 30% of the snaps. He saw 3 targets. And again, that's not a huge workload, but it is a role he is going to play and take away from Alex Collins himself. I do think Alex Collins is the much safer back. He's the better bet for a touchdown if they're playing from ahead, and he should be out there in neutral game scripts. So he's the one I prefer, but Homer does have a role.
Any kicker or defense action for either side?
In low risk contests, like the kickers a lot, they project well based on their prices. You just have to know they are not the largest upside plays. Their range of outcomes is a little narrower compared to the receivers and the tight ends in that range. For that reason, I play more of the cheaper receivers, cheaper tight ends, timeshare backs in tournaments, and in cash games, low risk contests. Either kicker to me is fine. Defense, they're really volatile. I think you play them when you get to them. You're not really looking to try to take a stand on defenses, in my opinion, particularly in game totals where you have 54-point totals overall.
You know what was really surprising to me is you look at just overall ownership on all of these players. Nobody is popping with massive ownership on this slate. And I think that speaks to how many viable options we have, from Stafford to Wilson to Metcalf to Lockett and Kupp, and even Woods and Higbee and Jefferson and all of these guys. And then the pending situation in Seattle's backfield. I mean, there's nobody that's really just jumping off the board as, God, he's going to be in 80-90% of lineups like we've seen with Christian McCaffrey and players like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think there's 2 good things about that. One, it doesn't lead to a really chalky build. Sometimes when you have like a really expensive captain like a Lamar Jackson and he's really popular, you need to really just play a cheap guy to get him. And then that cheap guy in the overall build becomes really chalky. In this case, I mean, there's 7 captains that have at least 7% ownership and none higher than 15.5%. So even that is spread. And I think a way you can approach this is, instead of getting really contrarian and captaining guys like, I don't know, Tyler Higbee. I actually think Tyler Higbee's viable, but I don't know if you want to. Let's say Deshaun Jackson. Instead of captaining guys like Deshaun Jackson, you can actually play one of the like medium range captains as far as ownership, like a Lockett, a Metcalf, and then get different in some other way, probably not as an egregious of a way as a captain Deshaun Jackson, and still be pretty unique. So I like these slates overall for the way your lineups look at the end. You can be contrarian in certain spots and still play good plays without having to get completely off the board.
Dave says, hey guys, I was offered Cooper Kupp and Noah Fant for Travis Kelce and Calvin Ridley in a full point PPR league. Is this a good trade? And then J187 says, for what it's worth, no one can evaluate a trade for you without knowing your roster. You have to remember, trades are not about getting a player, but the ones you're giving up, they're about making your team better. Well, yeah, but that's not necessarily true, because he's trading a quarterback and a wide receiver and a tight end for a wide receiver and a tight end. So we know that he's getting the same positions back, Matt.
I prefer the Kelce side. I don't know if he's on that side or he's giving it away, but whoever is the Kelce side, that sounds better.
No, he would get Kupp and Fant. As much as I love Cooper Kupp, I do not want to give up Travis Kelce. And then the problem is, you're trading away Calvin Ridley at probably his floor on the season. And I'm not very happy about that either.
100% agree.
Cool. All right. All right. You don't need to know that you don't need to know that it's a 2-for-2 trade. It's the exact same positions. Why would you need to know? What am I missing?
This doesn't really make sense. I think you need to know the roster when you're doing like 3-for-1s.
Right. But not same positions for same positions. You're just trying to upgrade the same position. No, of course not. That's common sense. All right. Matt, have I told you about Jock Market?
I've heard their promotions. It sounds really interesting. Tell me more.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Thank you. Well, first of all, if you use the promo code, let's get this out of the way first. It's the most important part. If you use the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, which is an exclusive offer only for the Awesemo community, get up to a $50 bonus when signing up and depositing. But here's what it is, okay? Jock Market has turned fantasy sports into the stock exchange. What's that, you ask? I'll tell you. You don't have to wait to the end of any game to make real money or to make money. Jock Market allows you to buy and sell shares of players in real time for real money with guaranteed payouts for all shares at the end of every night. With markets for NBA, NHL, NFL, MLB, and PGA, you make real money every hour, every minute, even down to the second of any game or match. But this is what makes it more fun than anything else, we've talked about. If you can use the pregame IPO to pick up shares of your favorite players, and you can buy, sell, or hold them during the game based on your analysis. So check out the app, download it in the App Store or the Google Play Store. Use the promo code Awesemo to get a $50 bonus on your first deposit. That's Jock Market, JOCK space MKT. Check it out in the App Store or the Google Play Store. All right, Matt. I think we've gotten through everything, but you know how we do here. No stone unturned. Any other skill players or position players you want to hit on before we build this lineup?
I think we hit on everybody of consequence.
Okay. Sounds good. Let's talk about building the lineup then. Let's do Millie Maker lineup. Let's just go all out.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay. So captain spot, I'm thinking Johnny Mund. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Let me go captain here. I'm going to go. I want to go off the board. I could see captaining Van Jefferson just ending up, being the play. To me, it's not the craziest idea. He has, what's his captain spot ownership, Matt? 4% right now.
He's fine, man. Like, he's on the field every snap. Nearly.
Let's do it. Let's open some things up. Jordan, you with us? We good? All right. Van Jefferson, captain.
Glad he's awake.
Yeah.
All right. So I think if you're doing that, you probably want to look at Stafford stacks. I don't think it's necessary because Van Jefferson is so cheap, but I think it's still the best way to play it.
Yeah, me too. High total, 28.5 point implied total for the Rams too. All right, 78.50 remaining.
We can do a lot of things because we did Jefferson. Like, we can play some studs.
Yeah, let's play some studs. I'll go actually on the opposite side and throw DK Metcalf in here. Stafford. Jefferson captain, Stafford, DK Metcalf. We have 3 spots remaining, Matt, around 7,100 per player.
I think we put Wilson in too.
Okay. All right, let's do it. Will it work? Can we make it work?
Yeah. So I'm operating under the assumption that Alex Collins is the lead back, which makes it a lot easier because you could play the run game pretty easily for Seattle and then still have a lot of money left. But we don't necessarily have to play Collins either, but that's just kind of the working assumption I've been using.
Okay. We got 4,700 remaining. Let's see if we can get anything cheap here and then round it out with one more solid player. I don't know if it's possible. I mean, you know what, Matt? This may be a Deshaun Jackson spot. We said earlier it was possible we could try doing some Jackson Jefferson lineups. I'm putting Deshaun Jackson in.
Well, we're playing the Millie too. I think it's completely fine there.
Yeah. So you've got Stafford and 2 pass catchers, but you're not paying a premium on either of those. Obviously, not having Cooper Kupp is scary, very scary. But if Cooper Kupp has a pedestrian game as the highest priced player in this entire game, and he comes up with like 5 for 60 and no scores, which is, I mean, the range of outcomes for Cooper Kupp is pretty wide, man. If he has 5 receptions for 60 yards, it's not the craziest thing. So
absolutely not.
All right, 5K remaining. You want to go with your boy Freddie Swain?
To be honest with you, I'm going to have lineups like this tonight with Jefferson at the captain because he's viable. And honestly, I probably will play a lineup that looks like this. I'll probably play one with Swain. I'll probably play one with the kickers, with Collins, maybe even a Sony Michel down there. I honestly think they're all viable in the Millie Maker. And I think just probably the best option here, the most volume, if you're trying to play that game, would be Alex Collins, assuming Carson's out. If Carson's in, it would be Swain.
All right.
So let's do Collins to round it out. That leaves us 1,800 on the table too, which is good for a Millie Maker style tournament. You probably don't want to max out your salary entirely. Let's do Collins.
I like it. And I also like the fact that he was targeted twice too last week, 2 for 34. I don't anticipate him having a ton of passing down work, but if you've got Wilson in there, I'm not opposed to that idea. Another thing about Wilson too that I like, Matt, is this build makes sense because when you have a team like this where the offense is pretty heavily concentrated, you've seen games where Wilson will go for 2 or 3 touchdowns and 2 of the touchdowns and 160 yards go to one receiver. So that's what I like about it, where maybe Alex Collins runs one in and gets the work, but it doesn't really hurt you from just stacking Wilson with one pass catcher.
Yeah, I 100% agree. We've seen it so many times where it's just Metcalf or it's just Lockett. And then one of the cheaper guys can get there just based off a little bit of volume, like maybe one big play. Even Swain for him, it's not going to take a lot for him to pay off. So if you wanted to put him in there instead of Collins, completely okay with it. And you laid out the argument for Collins in this lineup. So I'm 100% with you.
All right. Now, before we get to our best bets, couple things here. Almost 500 people watching. We just eclipsed 100 likes. So thank you to everyone for joining us, whether it's early morning, late morning. I don't care where the hell you are. You could be in Antarctica for all I care. Matt, what time is it in Antarctica right now?
Dude, I have no idea.
Take a guess.
We got to ask Ben Raza. He's the guy that would know.
What time is it? Take a guess.
Doesn't Antarctica stretch multiple time zones?
I don't know. Probably.
It is 10 a.m.
All right. It's 2:56 a.m.
Okay, I don't know.
I think you're right though. It must, right? It's massive.
That it stretches multiple time zones?
It must.
That's my common sense, but I don't know anything about Antarctica.
Actually, they don't even have a time zone because no one lives there. It says it's 2:56 though.
I think they use sundials no matter where you are.
Yeah, right. Anyway, the promo code D Hines says Antarctica. What the fuck, Laffy? Weren't we talking about it yesterday? Weren't we all talking about Antarctica yesterday? I thought we were. It was the three of us.
Yeah, we were.
Right?
I think it was off air.
Oh, was it off air?
Yeah.
Oh, never mind. Yeah. Anyway, someone asked about this earlier. I think, Jordan, you helped him out. But the promo code NFL Showdown, all one word, all caps, gets you 25% off everything on the site for the first week. Awesemo plus Platinum. Ownership projections, player projections, top stack tool, boom, bust tool, the lineup builder. You can grab the Fantasy Cruncher add-on for a week now if you'd like. NFL Showdown, all one word, all caps. All these tools built and used by the #1 ranked DFS player out there, Awesemo himself. Dudes won a lot of money using these tools. So is our boy Neil Orfield. Talked about it the other day. He's like, listen, these tools have helped me immensely. He just won another 300,000. And what I love about this is if you get the Express Pass, say you don't want to do a whole week. If you do the Express Pass, it's like $4 a week. All of our Showdown content and tools are included, like the ownership Matt and I talk about, the top plays tool that we talk about, all of that stuff, tiers as well. So no matter what you're looking for, you're a serious player, you're a hobbyist, you're a novice, you just want to have some fun, but you also want to win some money, or you're real intense about this. You can do a year, you can do a month, one sport, all sport, whatever. But if you want to get 25% off your first week of Awesemo plus Platinum, all sports, not just NFL, all these tools for all of our sports, use the promo code NFL Showdown, all one word, all caps. All right, Matt, give me your favorite bet for the week, for tonight. It could be a prop. It could be a side. It could be a total. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I like the Rams in this game overall. their advantages and their strength on both offense and defense, I think gets it done here. I really like that you can get it inside of a field goal, which was key for me. It's -2.5.
Okay. I'm going Russell Wilson under 23.5 rushing yards. I'm just not convinced that even if Chris Carson is out, I'm just not convinced by any stretch that it's going to mean that Russell Wilson runs a lot more. I mean, he had one game of 26 yards this year, but then he has 7, 16, and 9. Again, just not convinced that'll be the case against a good defense. And as it stands right now, you're getting it at -110 under 23.5. So Russell Wilson under 23.5. I'm assuming some of this Chris Carson has to be baked into that. And if it is, it makes me like it even more. That'll do it for us. Thanks for hanging out. As always, guys, I'll be back with you tonight for the NFL deeper dive for the Showdown slate. I'm also going to be back at 11 Eastern with Matt Savoca breaking down all of the matchups, all of the week 12 matchups for the main slate on week 5 at 11 Eastern, the marathon matchup show. Hang out with us. Follow Matt at Matt_Gajeski, myself at Lafayette_D, and stick around for the MLB strategy show coming up next. Before we go, Matt, what do you got coming down the pike for today and the rest of the week?
I'm not on any more shows today, but there is some college football live before locks tomorrow night and Saturday morning. If you're into college football, make sure to check those out.
And say thanks to your boy, Jordan Klein, living over there in the dark in the West Coast. Lights are on now. People are up, walking around. He's playing me out. Peace.